Okay, so thank you all for being here. I think this is our third week, maybe, of our virtual happy hour readings. Um, we have Melissa Ragsly, Kathryn Winograd, Tara Conklin, and Clare Beam with us today. We're going to start with the reading, and if we have time at the end, we will open it up for questions. So we'll start with Melissa Ragsly, who's a writer living in the Hudson Valley. Her short story collection, We Know This Will All Disappear, is available now. Her work has appeared in Best American Non-Required Reading, Best Small Fictions, Iowa Review, Hobart, and other journals. More can be found at melissaragsly.com, and I will also add that link to our chat section. Let's see. Melissa, where are you? There we are. Okay, you want to take it away?
Yes, thank you so much. I really appreciate having the chance to do this. There's so many people that have books that have come out at this time, and this is kind of the only way to sort of publicize it or connect with people and let everyone know that, hey, it's here. So I really appreciate having the opportunity to come and read tonight. And so it's a collection called We Know This Will All Disappear. It's out from Pank Books. There's a lot of flashes and some longer short stories in it. And I'm going to read just the beginnings of two longer stories tonight. One is only one page and one is maybe like 4 or 5 pages. And I was thinking about these two specifically because I felt that as openings of longer stories, they kind of feel a little bit separate to me and almost like they can sort of exist on their own. So this first one is called I Am a Gift, and it appeared in the Iowa Review. Okay. I was once somebody's birthday present. It was spring, still chilly, and oh, that sky was pink before it went dark. We'd arranged to meet at a whiskey bar in a city neither of us lived in. I came wrapped in an uncinched trench coat, crinkled from the flight. He smelled hotel soap on my skin. The scent, herbaceous and earthy, made me feel expensive and sought after, a product kept behind a counter. He kissed me right there as we lounged on the leather couch in front of sipping strangers, and he told me that today was his birthday and I was his present and that he deserved me. We finished our drinks in sips and gulps. He paid the check, even though I'd offered. It was his birthday after all. A full dozen years older than me. We walked the few blocks to my hotel, his hand around my waist. We huddled in one mass down the corridor to my room, passing frames of the city's sights hung at eye level. I slipped the key card out of my coat pocket. He unwrapped me slowly as if he was counting. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, all the way up to his 46 years. The room filled with bergamot and rosemary, his skin turned a shade of blue from the light coming in through the windows, mine, lavender. I was his. I was happy to be what he wanted. And when we left that hotel and boarded planes back to the lands of attachments, it wasn't me that was owned, it was the moment. And I got to keep it as well. Why is it that all the best gifts are secrets? I think of this often. Okay, so that's the beginning of that story. And now I'm going to read the beginning of a story called Pink. And it's a little longer. There's a paragraph and then a scene change. So I'll just tell you when I'm changing scenes because otherwise it might be a little jarring. Okay. So this is called Pink. I call you from the bathroom. I want you to know it's me. I don't think you'll answer, but of course you do. You want a report. How does Arthur measure up? You answer, and I tell you nothing has happened yet. I ask you about Italy. I hear your son cry in the background. Through the thin hotel walls, I hear Arthur drop ice in a glass. Arthur can probably hear me. So I turn on the shower and get undressed, still holding my phone. You answer about Italy. Then there's a scene change. Dick pic or nothing. All I'm working with is a nipple. I maneuvered my phone until I found the picture, a bubblegum pink circle sprouted confused hairs. It might as well be a pimple or a rash. A man's nipple, removed from the context of his body, was absurdly non-sexual. I had walked in a bit out of breath from the hill of Madison Avenue in the wasteland of the East 30s. You were in the booth facing the bathrooms, and I didn't want to tell you that the first thing I noticed about you, a great lake of a bald spot. It used to be narrower, Lake Erie, but since I'd last seen it, it had grown into Superior. I had approached your table and I felt the scratch of your fingers plucking at your linen jacketed arms. You're turning into him, I thought, just like I thought you would. I crunched into the vinyl booth and drinkers turned to stare at me. You lifted a rocks glass with neat whiskey and greeting. Your wedding ring clinked, it sighed. Dick pic or nothing. I tugged at my shirt, lifting it away from my chest so my greedy skin could breathe. How much could I have changed? The ratio of time and distance created an equation where the consistency of being with myself eliminated my ability to see any transformation in my appearance. I looked at myself and saw the same person I was in college. You were looking at me and saw years. I saw your flaws. You must surely see mine. I pulled back my unruly hair into a bun. The air conditioning turned Arctic. I couldn't regulate my temperature. He's an awful human being. You shook your head and hiccuped bile. And what did you send him in return? There, I felt it then. In unsteadiness. You didn't want to ask me directly. You wanted to see the pictures I had taken. Could I see that on you even if you didn't notice it yourself? Or was it like the raising of a blush coming from underneath layers of skin? You were unaware of any change to your color, but I could see your cheeks pinking. Surely you could feel the heat of it. Nice. I don't want it to be too risque. What if he shows someone? He would. He's a monster. You were still looking at the photo of Arthur's nipple that he'd sent me before you handed the phone back. He's just doing what everybody does, I said. You just want to fuck him, you said, and I could smell the sourness of your breath, the meat in the sandwich you might have had for lunch. If you were the chair of the department, which you know you will be when Arthur retires and someone 15 years younger was interested, wouldn't you try to fuck them? I'm married. Exactly the reason you would want to fuck someone else. I know I wouldn't send them a close-up of my nipple as the opening gambit. I watched your eyes leave mine. You looked down at your clenched hands clawing your drink. When you looked back up, your sight line was slightly to the right, then a quick check of the left. You finally noticed the coral studs in my ears. They were the size of chickpeas with an equator of gold encircling each one. You were with me when I bought them from the street market. You got those in Torino, near the Cinema Museum. The museum, inside the Mole Antoelliana, with Fellini's hat and a scarf stuck inside the glass. Damn, Arthur was livid. He started talking with his hands. Remember, he was shouting at the guards to let them out of the case so their spirit wouldn't be stuck inside. And what did you send back to him? All roads with us led to Arthur. I told you I hadn't sent any picture back yet. That's why I need your help. It's a choice of 3, each one a little more revealing. Go on, you said. But the waitress came and placed my drink down. A red plastic sword pierced 2 wedges of canned pineapple, a maraschino cherry sandwiched between. The syrup from the cherry diffused into the drink. It turned pink and toxic looking. You asked for another whiskey and a draft. Like a sloth, she trudged away. My head is a damn cotton candy fog. The baby hasn't slept through the night yet. How are you managing your classes? I asked. It's undergrad. As long as they have some embryonic cell of an idea that wasn't directly plagiarized, they pass. I admired you for going the teaching route. I didn't have that bone. I could care less about making people see things clearly. There were no admin jobs in the department after we graduated, so I trudged over to the East Side Annex, visual criticism, to make sure the library was archived and there was coffee and cream in the break room. It was a livable wage, but no potential for growth. What are the three choices? There they were again, your nerves, that sharp note you started the question with, but corrected so I might not notice. One is just cleavage, a little face, but I have a shirt on, unbuttoned down to below the bra. I pointed to my upper belly and your eyes unintentionally followed, which should not have surprised me. I felt like I was a laser pointer and you were a cat. Bachelor number 2, you rolled your wrists, twirling your fingers like fan blades, urging me to continue. You didn't realize it, but you looked like Arthur at the Italian museum using his hands for emphasis. Didn't we laugh over the way he said cinema, the Italian way with the hard CH sound, cinema? The next photograph is shirt lifted, full bra exposure, fuck me face. I attempted to mimic it, a blatantly hollow attempt only for a laugh, and it worked. Your dimple appeared like your face was made of quicksand and someone had just fallen into its trap. That dimple was the shadow of someone stuck inside of you. How's the lighting? Full, bright. My stomach looks a little too pale, cadaverous. Could be a fetish. No, it might remind Arthur of his all too near mortality. What else? I had trouble coming up with the words to describe the third picture. Spill it, you said. I can't. It's embarrassing. I'd taken the photo accidentally while scooting into what I thought was an alluring position, topless, my back arched. The camera's lens was above my head, held between stretched out arms. It caught open-mouthed lips, nipples pointing to the sky, and my top ribs poking out, stretching my flushed skin below the inflation of my breast. A blue vein branched between them, disappearing somewhere near my navel. I'd never seen myself in that position before, and it stunned me that a man might have. I looked like a young deer, freshly birthed on Bambi legs, only my mouth adult, jaws open, ready to consume the whole of anyone. My mouth, I thought, was made of hellfire. It was by far my favorite, but the most dangerous to send. Arthur might be turned on, but he might be scared too. I wanted to show the picture to you, but you didn't ask. I wanted you to ask to see it. Why didn't you ask? Tell me about the last one, you said. Before I told you, I wanted to get the image of you straight. You're more than bald spots and a dimple. I think of you in such stupidly romantic ways because of Italy. I'm embarrassed by the gaudy filter of my memories when we were just barely drinking age and every place you wander into is candlelit. I wanted to see you, 30, in that brightly lit New York bar, but instead, I saw the table as it was in Torino after you got Arthur's call, your half-finished shallow bowl of risotto, saffron threads you'd been afraid to eat, ice melting in your tumbler, enough for me to have drunk up the dregs while I waited to see if you'd return. In the bar, you removed your blazer, and your shirt's armpits were see-through globes, cavities dotted silver inside your mouth. A slight paunch puffed out from belted jeans. You looked tired. I could see the years on you. I said, I'm topless. In my mouth? You've never seen such a thing. I think you got your winner, you said. And I'll stop there. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Melissa. So next up, we have Kathryn Winograd. She has written 5 other books in addition to Slow Arrow, Unearthing the Frail Children, which was recently published by Saddle Road Press in March 2020. Phantom Canyon, Essays of Reclamation, her first collection of lyric essays, was a finalist in the Forward Review's 2014 Indie Fab Book of the Year Awards. Her first poetry book, Air into Breath, was the winner of the Colorado Book Award in Poetry. Her poetry has received 3 Pushcart Prize nominations and a special mention in Pushcart Prize 38. Let's see, Kathryn, we'll take it over to you.
Thank you. Hey, thank you so much, Andrea. And I want to thank Rachel Weaver, who set this up, in Lighthouse Writers. It's really wonderful to have a chance to share my work. I had a lot of events set up, and of course, they're not here, as it is for everyone. I was able to sit in last week and listen to the writers then, and I really liked it. It seemed very intimate. I'm hoping that this becomes a way that writers can share their work going forward. So Slow Arrow, Unearthing the Frail Children is my second collection of braided essays. We have some land up in Teller County, which is along Phantom Canyon, and which I love. And my mother came out about 6 years ago, and she was here so that I could help her with her last years of life. I started taking her to different places in Teller County. We went to a fossil quarry, there's a wolf sanctuary, there's gold mines. And as I took her around to these various places in Teller County, I realized that the outer landscape became metaphor for the inner landscape. And that what I wanted to braid together was not only what I saw as the beauty of Teller County, which I think is a microcosm of the beauty in the natural world all around us, but also the really important environmental issues that came up there. And then I realized it was about my mom's own migration and her journey and the journey of my family. So the book is a braiding of those 3 threads. I'm going to read the one I'm going to read tonight, and I'm reading parts of it because they're longer essays. But this was published in River Teeth a while back. This is called On Intla, Snow That Has Drifted Indoors. Some of you may remember this a number of years ago. Supposedly there was a whole 100 or 50 words that the Inuit Indians of the Arctic used for snow. And I found it online and thought they were just beautiful. And this is a spoiler alert. I found out it was all hoax, but that became part of the essay. But this is a weaving of me really trying to find some spirituality and the snow. So Intla, on Intla, Snow That Has Drifted Indoors, and it begins with a quote from Wallace Stevens: "I still feel the need of some imperishable bliss." The word Intla is supposedly one of the 50 or even 100 of the words the Inuit Indians of the Arctic use for snow. I recited them once to my mother, ill and sad on the eve of a winter solstice. How we marveled at the beauty of these words, their corporeality, the very fleshiness of snow we could feel against our tongues, those far Ohio snows, winter with my father and brother and sister. How young we were, the blades of our skates scouring the dark ice of our winter pond as we made our great loops again and again beneath the gray world, snow in the air glittering, in our hair glittering, Klin, remembered snow, Naklin, forgotten snow, snow that blinds you, Krotla. Last winter, I drove through freezing fog to reach our cabin. A great slick of it settled over Highway 24 through Ute Pass toward Divide. There was no Antla yet, no snow on objects, but atmospheric icing, water droplets in the air freezing on everything they touched. And then the rime formed, hard or soft, I don't know, ice it seemed encasing everything this winter fog touched. The white tufts of it battened to every frail stem I drove past, every last hanging leaf of the past year, as if some merciful God I could believe in had dipped the pillage world into bridal white, even the gas tank at the gas station covered in a bearded frost. Hirla, snow in beards on its windward side, what I'm told points to the wind. You see, it was the day the 2 French terrorists attacked the Charlie Hebdo, or the day 2,000 Nigerians were slaughtered by a militant extremist group that kidnapped schoolgirls. I drove past Pikes Peak where those ancient Ute Indians once migrated and believed Sun Mountain sitting big, shining mountain to be their nascent world, their great spirit out of a hole in the sky showering down enough snow and ice to Lapnia, snow that falls quickly for a whole new glittering world that I too wanted. Of course, the EPA had come out with its annual report too, and it looked grim. The report looks at the conditions of a specific environmental area over a span of time that seems to indicate enduring climate changes. The indicators of change include the predictable, like greenhouse gas emissions, global temperatures, ocean heat, but the lesser known ones too that surprised me, like Lyme disease, ragweed pollen, bird wintering ranges, and the leaf and bloom dates. And of course, snow, the fall and breadth and depth of it. Certainly, according to this report, not enough for that new world the Utes search for with each migration. Wallace Stevens said one must have a mind of winter and been cold a long time not to think of any misery in the sound of the wind, in the sound of a few leaves. This spring, I am to speak on a writer's panel about the spiritual memoir, and I'm wondering how cold I am. Do we build or blow up bridges between the faith community and the private realm of the spiritual, we'll ask ourselves? Or what craft choices do we make, especially describing the exposition of insight and the drama of awakening? And finally, are we spiritualized by writing these books, especially when we, the ex-religious ones, or me, the never religious one, attempt the peril of translating ineffable experience into narrative and essay? Leonard, when I tell him of my spring quest, has, of course, something to say. You in the spiritual, he pauses to savor the moment. Kind of a complete contradiction, wouldn't you say? Ineffable experience. I do wonder what that means, exactly. Is it when I think of my father, as Leonard reminds me I am ought to do, left behind in that country graveyard I played in as a child, buried in a tiny plot of earth in a place called Murdoch where the grass never would grow, and now, as if I dreamed awake, he's walking toward us once more from the far fields, soybean, or the hay we baled each late summer, sweat black on the rim of his straw hat, a whole continent of shadow, of hide hair and chafe across the belly of his shirt, and a soul still half light, still potter's clay, chia, snow that makes halos. Reality is a cliche from which we escape by metaphor, Stevens said. Perhaps this language of poetry easier for me than the language of the spiritual. By the time I reach divide, the rhyme has disappeared and the frozen fog that iced the air laid below me like a great and faraway sea I might forget. At the cattle crossing to the old Dilly Ranch, the southern sun above the Sangre de Cristo Mountains blinded me, and I remembered how glad I was to be there, calling the mountains blood of Christ as I heard them called, and the hollows in the snow patches scattered across our high mountain meadows, sun cups, though I knew them to be oblation hollows, depressions, metaphor you see, formed in the sun, snow by sun or by the constant wind, our wind, which is the sound of the land, as Stevens said, blowing in the same bare place for the listener who listens in the snow. I live mostly far below this cabin in a suburb that can feel like the epicenter of disaster, a community of faith, I think I'll call it, that I don't belong to, so distant from the solitary place of wind and sometimes snow that I always migrate to, driving past the geological unconformities and faults of a mountain made by shifting tectonic plates millions of years ago, along a highway where I can still imagine Indians traveling to breathe in the breath of great spirits bubbling through water. Holy, they said. Krikeya, snow mixed with breath. Last night, my mother spoke of snow again. Metaphor, you see, those poetics I can understand. Cold, she said, winter is feeding our cattle in Ohio, and heavy, dragging the hay bales across the barn loft, cutting the baling twine free, and the hay scattering through the loft window like bluid, snow shaken down from objects in the wind. I, the girl child, waiting below for the beloved mother to climb the ladder down. How good it felt, running my bared fingers through the cleaning frost, the skim of troughed ice. I just don't understand why I'm here, Mother said at dinner again with her customary half chuckle. I don't mean here, but here in this world, now. Calliope snow drifts you fall into and die. I imagine all I love here at this cabin at 9,600 feet, coyotes zipping toward dawn, the chirr of house wren outside the window, Leonard's warm breath at night against my neck, as if it might be lost tomorrow. Metaphor or prophecy, I think, from which we discover those unknown connections that bind self with other, that perhaps allow us to experience momentarily that completeness that Paul the Apostle speaks of, we who see through a glass darkly and cannot yet speak in the tongues of men or angels. A few years ago, when even tila, ordinary snow in the north crevices of our rocks had melted, I remember standing on the deck of our cabin before leaving for a few weeks to the MFA residency I taught for in the summer. Finally, after long years of drought, the summer monsoon swelled, the sky, I later wrote, swept clean of cinder from our western fires. All around me that moment, Chopin sonatas, what I had played as a girl on the piano, and what I'd listened to my mother play, and the sleeping hummingbirds, and the sharpest quarter moon caught like a shining cloth in the window panes. Life is not people and scene, but thought and feeling, Stevens wrote. How I wanted to believe him that night, believe him now, when I look back into those windows as if the ineffable and not the tangible, that flesh of snow were all that mattered. Light, words, fire to be lit come fall, sound of wind, always wind, I wrote, all I loved here. Yet no matter what I wanted to believe, I knew that below me in the plains by morning, the first funerals for the Aurora Theater massacre would begin, 12 dead, the largest massacre at that time in one shooting. Triniya, snow that never reaches the ground. Pensla is the Inuit word for the idea of snow. From the cabin, I watched the little snow given us take on the color of sky beneath noctilucent night shining clouds. The Utes who traveled here so long ago to worship a god in the creation of a world once bent saplings and tied them close to the earth with yucca rope. Prayer trees, they called them. These trees bowed to the ground and filling the wind, the Utes said, with prayer for 800 years. I wonder if we look at the ugliness of the world that exists even here in this place I love, despite the mining district that surrounds it, the yellow spill of mine tailings I pass, the black maw of the mines beneath their gallows that some Utes may never have known. Could we make a kind of beauty of it, dust like yellow rose brushed to the ground, or a tree that never reaches the sky? Stephen contends that the poet's purpose is to interpret the external world of thought and feeling through the imagination. I have lost count in these last years of atrocity since I wrote those words in my journal, and my beautiful Inuit words that made my mother on a darkest night exclaim with awe, that brought home to her and to me the husband and the father we were missing, and right there on the edge of everything, our whole family still skating through the world on shining blades. Those words were part of a ruse called the Great Eskimo Vocabulary Hoax by a British-American linguist and perpetuated by an entertainer in a satiric piece, The Eskimos' 100 Words for Snow, Intla, snow that has drifted indoors and not the glittering kind. Languages, the experts say, evolved to suit the ideas and needs that are most crucial to the lives of their speakers. How do I turn the ineffable into word? Be spiritualized before the time of a quickening spring that spreads lilacs across computer-generated models as if blooming lilacs were a blight. Or my little windflowers of purple, those past flowers called Easter flowers that I seek out late or early spring in the last tatters of snow. 4 o'clock and the sun dives beneath the clouds. Shadows swamp the pastures and the old snows deepen to blue. I go outside to stand in the snow, to listen like the snowman who nothing himself beholds, nothing that is not there and the nothing that is. The wind I can hear drilling through the ghost aspen. Somewhere I know there are prayer trees doubled down in the snow, just as I know there is gold in the granite and the rose quartz the old homesteaders pickaxed into the glory holes I have so long stood at the glittering edge of. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, next up, we will have Tara Conklin. She is a writer and former lawyer whose first novel, The House Girl, published by William Morrow, was a New York Times bestseller, #1 Indie Next Pick, Target Book Club pick, and has been translated into 8 languages. Her second novel, The Last Romantics, also published by William Morrow, was published in February 2019 to wide acclaim. An instant New York Times bestseller, The Last Romantics was a Barnes & Noble Book Club pick, Indie Next Pick, and was selected by Jenna Bush Hager as the inaugural read for the Today Show Book Club. All right, and let me find Tara. There you are. All right, take it away, Tara.
Unmute
there
now.
We go.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Wow, this is really something. I've been spending a lot of time on Zoom with my children's teachers and trying to figure out distance learning, but this is the first reading that I have done on this platform, and it's great to see everybody and to hear everybody. It's wonderful. Like everyone else, I've had a bunch of events that have not come to pass. One of them, in fact, in Denver later this month. So it's fun to be doing this. And yeah, thank you all for being here on a Friday evening. I am going to be reading from The Last Romantics. This is my most recent novel. It came out in hardcover in February, and it just came out in paperback in January. The book is, it was about 10 years in the making. It's a family drama. It follows the 4 Skinner siblings. We have Fierce Renee, Golden Boy Joe, Dreamy Caroline, and Watchful Fiona. The book opens in the year 2079 with Fiona, who's the youngest sibling, addressing a packed auditorium. She is a famous poet, and she is notoriously reclusive. She has been asked to speak and this is the first time in many years she's spoken, and it's likely to be the last appearance of her career. And a young woman rises from the crowd and asks her to explain the inspiration behind her most iconic work, a poem called simply The Love Poem. And this is a question that Fiona has been asked many times before and has always refused to answer. But on this night, on this occasion, she decides it's time to tell the story. And her answer to that question is the novel. And it goes, the framing device, the narrative sort of framing device in the book is this future time, 2079, when Fiona, who is supposed to be a woman of my generation, is looking back on her life. And she's looking back from a future that is a bit wrought with disaster. And I specifically never go into detail about what that disaster is, but it is a time of crisis and a time of social concern and social crisis. And it's just been interesting over the past, month that people have reached out to me and talked about this book in a whole different way than I was talking about it, a year ago when it first came out. And so it's really been interesting, this time period reaching out to other writers and to readers. And you know, I think Kathryn was saying that she hopes that you know, this kind of technology can be used going forward. I think there are a lot of habits and a lot of reflections that this time period is forcing us to make. And I hope that a lot of those can travel with us forward as well. Okay, here we go. I usually just read the opening chapter when I'm doing readings at bookstores, but I don't know if it's going to be long enough. So I'll start, and then I will see where we are for time. Okay. Year 2079. At first, I believed the girl to be an apparition, a ghost. She rose from the crowd in the auditorium and walked to the microphone. I remained very still. For the past 90 minutes, I had been seated on stage to discuss my body of work. As much as I dread large crowds, the event had been a success. The audience was respectful, intelligent, curious. I'd even made them laugh. That joke about the frog, of all things. We heard the sirens only once, a brief wail during which I paused my reading. We all waited, the 1,000 here in the auditorium and the thousands more watching via satellite and DTR. We waited, and then the sirens quieted, and I resumed with my poem. Afterward, the questions, so many questions. My first public event in 25 years, of course there would be questions, but I was not prepared for the intensity, the thoroughness with which these people had read my work. It still surprises me now, 80 years into this literary experiment, that my words might mean something to anyone other than myself. I am 102 years old and a poet of some renown. My name is Fiona Skinner. When the girl stepped forward, my attention was elsewhere, my energy low. I wondered what snack Henry had waiting for me backstage and hoped it was the candy with the peanut butter in the center, my favorite. My thoughts fixed on other comforts, the tall, soft bed in my house in the mountains, the river stocked with trout, the deep, cold well, the generator with its soothing hum. We never heard the sirens there. No, the nearest town was too far. It was a safe place, our house, a place beyond the reach of politics and rising oceans. At least that's what I chose to believe. It's possible to exist under any number of illusions, to believe so thoroughly in the presence of things you cannot see, safety, God, love, that you impose upon them physical shapes, a bed, a cross, a husband. But ideas willed into being are still ideas and just as fragile. The girl at the microphone was an arresting sight. Slender and tall, a dark bob cut short and sharp to her chin. She looked 18, perhaps 20 years old. Not a girl then, nearly a woman. The crowd was silent. She coughed into her hand. Miss Skinner, she began. My name is Luna. Luna, I said, and my voice caught, my breath stilled. For a moment, I traveled back all those years to a different place and time. At last, I thought, Luna has returned. Yes, my mother named me after the last line of the love poem, she said. Oh, of course, I smiled. Henry had told me about this, the popularity of the name. The love poem had that effect on some readers. They wanted to keep a piece of it. And here was one of those babies, now grown, standing before me, another Luna. The girl's face was half in shadow. I saw a mole high on her right cheek, about the size of a dime, a birthmark, a dark kiss. My mother always wanted to ask you about the name, Luna continued. She'd memorized the last pages at school. When my brother and I were little, she'd recite them at dinner if we were feeling down. Her face became soft with the memory. The love poem meant so much to her. I want to know for my mother, who was your inspiration? Who was Luna? The auditorium went still. On stage, the lights had become hot, but a cold spread through me, ice flooding my veins. I shivered. It was a question I'd always refused to answer publicly and privately. Even Henry didn't know the truth. But of course, I should have expected it tonight. Isn't that why I'd agreed to speak one last time? Isn't that why I was here, to finally tell this story? An old regret lodged in my throat, blocking my voice. I coughed. Luna is the Spanish word for moon, of course, I said. In the poem itself, there are many metaphors, many symbols that mean different things. I wrote it 75 years ago, my dear. Your mother, you, anyone here. I waved my palm at the audience. You know what the poem means more than I do now. The Luna standing before me shook her head in frustration. A lock of hair fell into her eyes and she pushed it away. No, I mean the real woman. My mother always said there was someone named Luna. I straightened my spine and heard the bones crack, a minor internal disruption. I wasn't often put on the spot. At home, I had a gardener, a personal assistant, a housekeeper, a cook. I lived with my second husband, Henry, but I ran the house and gave the orders. Some might say I'm imposing. I prefer to think of it as self-assured. This girl was also self-assured. I could see it in the set of her shoulders, the purse of her lips. How to describe the first Luna? I met Luna Hernandez only once, on a night when the wind threw tree branches onto the road and leaves whirled in crazy circles. Decades ago, a lifetime ago. That Luna had grown and changed in my mind until I hardly saw her anymore. Were her eyes brown or gray? The mole, was it high on the right cheek or the left? Had it been remorse I saw on her face that night, or merely dismissal? I wrote a poem about love, I began, addressing the crowd. But there are certain limitations. There are certain failings. I've always been wary of love, you see. Its promises are too dizzy, its reason.
Sorry, I think we lost Kara. Is everyone else still here? Yes, okay. I'm not sure what happened to Tara. I think our connection must have went out.
I'm back.
Ah, there you are.
All of a sudden I lost everybody. Should I just keep going?
Yes, go for it.
Okay, all right. I'm almost to the end. So let's see. When I was young, I tried dissecting love, setting it up on a table with a good strong light and poking, prodding, slicing. For years, I believed it possible to identify the crux, the core, and that once you found this essential element, you might tend it like a rose and grow something beautiful. Back then, I was a romantic. I didn't understand that there's no stopping betrayal. If you live long enough and well enough to know love, its various permutations and shades, you will falter. You will break someone's heart. Fairy tales don't tell you that. Poetry doesn't either. I paused. You're not answering the question, Luna said. Her arms were now crossed against her chest, her chin down. Let me tell you a story, I said. In these difficult times, stories are important. In a sense, stories are all we have to tell us about the future. Luna moved away from the microphone. She was listening intently. Everyone was, shoulders pitched just slightly forward, curious and alert. Once upon a time, I began, there was a father and a mother and 4 children, 3 girls and 1 boy. They lived together in a house like any other house, in a town like many other towns, and for a time they were happy. I paused, and all those faces in the auditorium stared down on me, all those eyes. And then there was the pause. Everything started there. Our mother didn't mean for it to happen. She didn't. But this is a story about the failures of love, and the pause was the first. I'll just end there because I'm afraid I'm going to lose my connection again.
Thank you so much. It was
You're so
beautiful, even
welcome.
though there was a blip.
Thank you.
Alrighty, so next up we have, last but certainly not least, Clare Beams. Her story collection, We Show What We Have Learned, won the Bard Fiction Prize, was longlisted for the Story Prize, and was a Kirkus Best Debut of 2016, as well as a finalist for the PEN Robert W. Bingham Prize, the New York Public Library's Young Lions Fiction Award, and Shirley Jackson Award. Her fiction appears in One Story, N+1, Ecotone, The Common, The Kenyon Review, Hayden's Fairy Review, Electric Literature's Recommended Reading, and the Best American Non-Required Reading, and has received special mention in the Best American Short Stories 2013 and the Pushcart Prize 35. Her novel, The Illness Lesson, was published by Doubleday Knopf in February 2020. Without further ado, we will hand it over to Clare. Yes, unmuted.
Great. Can you hear me? Okay, yes. All right, so thank you so much to Lighthouse for doing this, and it's such a pleasure to be here and reading with these other writers. I, like everyone else, had some events that were supposed to be occurring right now that are not occurring in any sort of real life fashion. So the virtual substitute is really nice. And it's really such a pleasure to hear these writers read. So thank you, everyone. So I am going to read a little bit from The Illness Lesson, which is the book that came out a few weeks ago. And I'm not going to start at the beginning, so I have to tell you a little bit so that what I'm about to read makes sense. So we are at a brand new school for girls in 1871 Massachusetts. And the founder of this school is an aging philosopher named Samuel Hood, who has decided to try for greatness one more time by showing the world that girls can do all the same things that boys can do. Radical concept. And his 29-year-old daughter, Caroline, is our main character. So she is also teaching at the school, along with David, who is her father's sort of last acolyte, and to whom Caroline is finding herself increasingly drawn with time. So I'm reading from a scene that happens once the school has opened and everything starts to go very wrong. So Eliza, one of their students, is proving very difficult in many ways and has also just fainted mysteriously. There's a creepy flock of mysterious red birds that has descended. And it turns out that David has a wife that he failed to mention, and he has just brought her to the school to teach art alongside the others. So this, the part that I'm going to read is a scene where Sophia has just arrived and she is going to watch David teach for the first time. In the barn, just before his lesson began, Sophia asked her husband, "Duck, aren't you going to sit at the desk?" She was close enough to Caroline on the visitor's couch that Caroline was breathing her flowery, humid smell. "Duck," Livia said, seizing on this extravagant gift. "That's what I've always called him. He just has a ducky sort of look to him sometimes." Sophia's mood seemed to be lifting, perhaps because David was at the front of the room and hers. "Please, Sophia," David said. He was trying to seem amused. This was the opposite of his usual act in the time just before his lessons began, when the girls would pepper him with teasing questions and he would feign offense. "What do you do when class is over, Mr. Moore? Mr. Moore, what's your favorite thing to eat? Do you like mornings or afternoons better? Summer or fall? Blue or green? Walking or riding?" Each question a search for a loose piece of skin they could pry up. David knew better than to answer most of the time, but Caroline had seen the way he relished the search. "Ducky," Felicity said. "Ducky duck," Livia said. Please, girls. Samuel wouldn't have said please. He would have just stopped it somehow. But Samuel was in his study, reluctant perhaps to see any more of Sophia's first full day at Trilling Heart. David took a breath, adjusted his face, and reached into his pocket for his notes. As he drew them out, just at that moment, as if he were pulling a rope, the section of ceiling over the bookshelves gave, with a wet, rotten-voiced splintering. A cascade of something fell to the ground. Everyone shrieked, then gathered around the column of dusty light that now stood in the room, peering up at a patch of blue sky. A cloud drifted. The board sagged, lolled like a tongue. The smell, wet, rich, dark, animal, reached them, and they pulled back, covering their mouths. What happened? It's not even raining, Meg said. Sophia gestured toward the board's moist, ragged ends and spoke through her fingers. It didn't have to be. Look at the wood. It's amazing it held this long. The brown cascade had heaped at their feet. Like the weave of a basket, it was at first one thing, one dun-colored mass. And then, when the gaze lingered, many small bits of things. Slivers of soft wood, but also loose twigs, grasses, all of it wet-looking. A dirty tuft of reddish-brown feather, pieces of it still together enough to suggest curvings, cuppings, but of several different circumferences. Caroline tried to assemble the mess into one shape in her imagination. A nest, said Felicity, wrinkling her sharp nose. She towed the feather, closer even than David, to the whole mess despite the smell. Felicity, Caroline sometimes suspected, might have a future as an intrepid explorer of some distant region. A Trilling Heart nest? I don't know, said David. It's the wrong time of year, but it does look that way. They must have piled all this on the roof and then water accumulated in it, and that's the source of the trouble. Could the others see now that they were being invaded? These birds were not some beautiful romantic happening, some transforming touch to turn life into Samuel's essays. They were strange, savage creatures that carried their inscrutable nature with them and sent it raining down on top of other, feebler plans. And could the others smell it? Caroline peered up through the ceiling hole into the sky, craning for a glimpse of what? Whatever landscape the birds had made of their roof. Though somebody would have seen, wouldn't they, if there were much more than this, if this weren't all or close to all of it? Oh, said Julia, and pulled something from the jumble, touching only the corner. Look, the lace bit I was missing. We told you none of us took it, Livia said. It's all stained. Julia dangled it so they could see the watery blotch in the middle. Do you think with washing? From within the layer of brown peeked something else, underbelly light. Caroline bent and lifted it. A small bit of fraying ribbon, sun and rain bleach to a faint seafoam color, rough between her fingers with grime. That's mine, said Abigail. I lost it the first week. No, I think it might be mine. I've been missing my blue ribbon for ages, said Tabitha. It isn't blue, though. It's green. I dropped one just like it somewhere, Eliza said. Can I see it? Asked Rebecca, taking it from Caroline's hand. Really, I think it's mine. My sister gave me a pair of them for my birthday. I've only got one left in my box upstairs. Girls, said Caroline, taking it back. It's only a tiny scrap. It could be anybody's, or a tatter of laundry from the next house. Certainly it's good for nothing now anyway. David used his foot to rake the pile toward the corner, as if in this manner the bird's invasion could be reversed when the smell still hung, thick with life as the mud at the bottom of a river. He stretched up to push the loose boards back into place, but when he let go, they dropped again. I'll nail it back up for now, he said. I'll just be a moment. I'll fetch a hammer. This chance to escape a lesson that hadn't been going well was not, perhaps, unwelcome. The door closed behind him and they all went back to their seats. The shaft of light hovered solidly like a feature of a holy painting, and in the corner that formless, indecipherable heap. Slowly, the smell dissipated. Slowly, the room began to shift its attention to Sophia. She had long ago done what they all wanted to do, after all, pried up David's skin and gotten to the meat of him. Mrs. Moore, how did you meet Mr. Moore? Livia asked, leaning her chin into her hands. This Caroline did know how to stop. She could just stand, go to the blackboard, and copy out a prompt for the girls to answer in their notebooks while they waited. In doing so, she would show the girls they were not to ask such questions, and show Sophia she was not to refer to her husband as Ducky in front of their mutual students. Show her that she had perhaps much to learn here, and that Caroline knew it all already. But Caroline also wanted to hear the answer to the question Livia had asked. Oh, when do you meet the people you've known forever? Sophia said. You were childhood sweethearts? Rebecca asked. I was a child anyway, Sophia laughed. What were you wearing when he proposed? My best yellow gown. This was just after church. Every girl in the room was putting herself into that yellow gown and into the space in front of David. Caroline, too, could feel the sunshine warmth of its fabric under her palms and beneath her own body, warmer still and soft. He told me, "You look beautiful. You always do. Would you do me the great honor of being my wife?" Sophia's caricature of David's voice made Caroline flinch, all stiff, just like that, like he was reading lines. She laughed again, and the sound this time was low and almost secretive. Eliza said, "Do you think we should be discussing this?" Sophia stopped. "I mean, it's very interesting, but I wonder if Mr. Moore would like it, since he's not here," said Eliza, with one of her best smiles. Eliza was paler and thinner than she had been, Caroline thought, the skin of her face tightening and drawing back. The look of suffering was on her like gray light, though since she had fainted, Caroline hadn't caught her suffering at anything. This intercession of Eliza's was, of course, a reprimanding of Caroline, too. "He'd think it's fine," flustered, Sophia waved a hand. "I'm allowed to talk about him." But she didn't anymore. As they listened to the clock tick then, waiting for David's return, Caroline glanced, she tried not to glance, at the ribbon she put beside her on the couch, which looked, she tried not to think it looked, like one she'd had as a girl, a beautiful spring green ribbon she tied at the end of her long braid. Whatever happened to that ribbon? Thrown away or lost somewhere. It had probably not been sitting in the soil of their fields for over a decade, waiting for a beak to pluck and carry it. No reason to look at this scrap and read her name. And what if it were hers? There was no special meaning in that, only that so many years had passed and the birds had plucked the ribbon straight through those years for some purpose of their own. And here she still was, just the same, to meet that purpose, to have it done to her. And I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Claire.
Thank you.
This has been great. What a success, I think. Okay, so we have time for maybe one question.
One second, maybe there's questions.
If anyone wants to jump in or write a question.
But I might have to say bye or something, so I might have to hide you for a minute. But okay, so you fall more in love with actions. Okay, me too. I know, but actions, dude, actions mean at the end of the fucking day, they actually mean more than words.
If you have a question, go ahead and pop it into the chat and I'll just filter through those. We can give it, I think, maybe like 5 minutes if you guys have time. Okay, so we have a question from Amy Mercer. She would love to know about Claire's research process. So Claire, if you want to answer that.
Sure. So I am not the kind of writer who like researches for 10 years before ever putting pen to paper. I think in part because I have a 7-year-old and a 3-year-old. And I always worry that I actually really, really love researching, but I'm always worried that if I do that, I will never write anything. So I tend to be someone who sort of makes myself start. And then as I encounter things that I need to know, I fill them in or I mark them and I sort of go back and research that way so that the writing and the research are happening sort of at the same time. I think it also probably helps that, so this is historical fiction, but it's also historical fiction in which like I've invented a weird species of red bird. Like there's a sort of surreal streak sort of running through also. So it's not, since it's not based on actual people who actually lived, I made up these characters. I did, you know, have a certain amount of leeway that I could take, although I didn't want to get things wrong either.
Okay, the next question is also for you, Claire. In the current moment and the serendipity of book about a pandemic during a pandemic, is that been uncomfortable or somewhat of a blessing?
Well, so it's the book, like I wouldn't really describe this as a book about a pandemic. It's a book about mass hysteria, but it's in a very localized setting, like really more, the stuff that resonates more in some ways is how sort of isolated this school is, and sort of how sort of sequestered from everyone else. So this is not, the illness that the girls experience in this book is not the kind of illness that comes from a virus. It is a sort of, it's a psychogenic illness that they're experiencing, sort of basically because of the situation in which they've been put. So I think the title sort of makes it sound like the book is super relevant, and I hope it has relevance, but it is not exactly a pandemic book. So.
So I also think this is for you, Claire.
You can do somebody else if you want.
Christy says, I hate that your celebrations have been drowned out by the COVID-19. Any plans to relaunch or have another publication celebration?
Well, so I did get to have like a huge, wonderful launch party in Pittsburgh because my book came out February 11th. So I basically got like 3 weeks of normal book launch in. And so I think there will probably be more things around the paperback, I hope, which is usually about a year after the hardback. But we'll see. And things like this are lovely in the meantime.
Okay, so I think we have time for one last question. And this one is for Tara. Can you talk about your character development?
Sure, yeah. Yeah, the book, there is a lot of character development in The Last Romantics. It takes place over about 100 years, and it starts when they are children and then follows them through to adulthood and Fiona until she's quite elderly. The way that I found these characters is writing a lot about them. I said that this took me about 10 years to write. I didn't plan for it to take me 10 years. It took 10 years because I wrote the book 3 times, and 3 times I sent it into my editor, and 3 times, well, actually 2 times my editor said, no, this is not the book. And over the course of that time and writing these characters, it really was a process of discovering them. And the example that I give the most in terms of sort of what kind of changes happened, I mean, the character of Renee, who's the oldest sister in the book, she in the very first iteration of the novel was a Pilates instructor with no children. And in this book, she is a transplant surgeon who becomes a mother quite late in life. So she went on this journey from Pilates to surgery. And all of the characters really, I mean, except for maybe Fiona was always a poet. I mean, I really wanted her to be an artist in sort of the purest sense, and poets are, for me, that kind of artistry. But the rest of them, it really was a very much a process of discovering who they were. And, you know, I wish I had some good tips to give about how to develop characters other than writing about them and thinking about them for 10 years. I just recently saw Michael Cunningham way before COVID talk, and he said that he likes to write down 20 things about each character before he starts writing. And I thought that was a very good suggestion, just like a very concrete thing that you can do. Write down 20 things about your characters. So yeah, so I hope that answers your question.
Great, thank you so much, Tara. And I want to thank everybody for coming and doing this reading and taking time out of your day. I'm not sure what's going on with everyone's days. I'm sure they're hectic, even though you're inside. So thank you for coming. And then I also want to thank everyone who joined in. Hopefully we'll see you all at the next happy hour reading.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.